Today on TGS we're going to be talking with Nick Horten about the wildfowling season and, well, how it was. How was it?
Or how wasn't it? Bit stop and start. I'm trying to get my failing memory around what actually happened last season. First of all, we were out of lockdown and then we went into the tiered system on this season. Is that right?
That is. So we had a November lockdown and then we went into
that's it. Yeah,
a hefty tier season.
Yes. So we ended up in tier 4, but that meant that because of the distance parameters that were suggested and many other things, I was still able to go. And of course, thanks to the good work of the shooting associations, it was deemed that wildfowling was acceptable as exercise and permissible in its own right. So that was very useful as well. The main problem was, of course, that not only were the majority of us sitting at home on our hands one way or another, but also the vast majority of Joe Public. And because we all like to get out to do something in the fresh air at some point during the course of a day, the net result of that has been that the coastal marshes all round the British Isles have been absolutely inundated with people. So much so that many clubs suspended shooting ahead of any other requirement simply because their interactions or potential interactions with the public were of such a magnitude that it just wasn't worth the candle. It was safer for everybody just to walk away until, well, in this case it's been pretty much the end of the season. I know, for instance, that where I shoot in Langston Harbour, the visitor footfall has virtually quadrupled.
Wow.
And it was high enough to before that.
I was going to say, we always used to see people
yes.
the few times we've been out together.
Yeah. And usually what's happened is that particularly during the early morning, the people that previously you would have met would have been regulars, that they would have known who we were. Again, we've had people walk past when we've been wildfowling, you give them a friendly wave and exchange greetings. Everyone's happy. It got to the point where we were kind of bumping into people who had no idea what we were doing, were slightly taken aback to see people with guns, all the usual panic.
It ruins a lot of the fun when you have to stay for half an hour to explain what you're doing to somebody. Exactly.
So that was kind of universal. From a wildfowl point of view, the pity of it was that this was quite a good season, or had the makings of a reasonable season, by virtue of the fact that we had a good head of birds in bird numbers. Stuff was moving around within the country. We on a couple of occasions we had lots of pintail. I shot a beautiful cock, a pintail, full adult male bird with a pin yay long in his tail. I usually manage a few in the course of a season, but this was a particularly nice one. This time last year, and again, if you cast your mind back on the couple of occasions that we went out together, we saw next to nothing. It's such as wildfowling. We drew the short straw. A lot of that, in terms of that season, was down to birds short stopping, often in Holland. Then they never got past the Zyder Z because it was so pleasant for them. This year they've carried on, plenty of birds about, but no shooting. Our marsh has been thick with Canada geese. Typically, last year we went out, saw a few, but didn't get a shot. I think myself and a colleague and a couple of other lads were out one morning earlier in the season. I had 3, he had 2. A couple of the other lads had 3 or 4 between them. There were geese everywhere, and that's the way it goes.
Yeah, I was going to say there's no you don't hold a grudge against it. It's just the way it is.
No, I enjoyed the bit of the season that we did have, and I'm as ever looking forward to the next one. Let's chalk that one up to experience, and see what next year brings. And I've literally, partly in connection with that, about 45 minutes ago, I had my part 1 COVID injection. So let's fingers crossed and
the future is bright.
Kind of see what happens with that.
I remember even before all of the third rise of the COVID, there was a bird flu issue on the marsh as well, wasn't there?
Actually, yes, and again, I'm sure this is affecting my mind more so than usual. I completely forgot about bird flu. God, what a performance that was! For us, it started when everybody knew that bird flu was around. It seems to have gone through, particularly the likes of the Brent goose population. I don't know that it was any more severe, but very often the smaller waders, if they get it, the dunlin and what have you, they are quickly picked up. I mean, a dunlin is a mouthful for a blackback gull, whereas a Brent goose is a slightly different proposition. But there were dead Brent everywhere. I went for a walk around the marsh, not shooting one day, and counted 6. Lying around on the shore.
Enough to notice. And
of course the problem then became, do you carry on shooting as we had been doing beforehand, knowing that there were dead geese, which were nothing to do with us, littering the foreshore, but of course the general public, who
probably don't know what a Brent goose is,
don't know other than it's a dead bird, and I've seen a bloke with a gun, so he must have shot it. We did in fact we had some of that, but we did manage to deal with it with our landlords and our other partners quite successfully. But it's just an illustration, I think, of how, as you said earlier, huge numbers of people bring with them all sorts of other problems, as we touched upon early on and right back at the beginning of this, when one of the farms that I shoot over did have some rape in. Quite legitimately went for a day's pigeon shooting. I was there for about an hour, shot 6 or 7 pigeons, and decided to pack up and go home because there were family parties walking around in the fields. Never mind the few footpaths, but people just wandering around ad lib.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? The different relationships people have with the countryside, and there does, as I've said before, fall a responsibility on us to try and educate people on how to use the countryside responsibly, but it does ruin a good day's pigeon shooting.
Indeed it does. Yes.
Last time we did a video on your gun, their steel shot update, and there was a lot of scoring in the barrels.
Yes.
That we addressed at the time, not knowing what it was. We have more information.
Well, my conviction is that it was the tooling for the removal of the chokes, for boring out the chokes.
Seems sensible because it is in every gun that you have.
Well, there is a caveat to that which I'll come on to. And I think I mentioned at the time that when the job was done, no disrespect to the chap who did it, he was a very competent gunsmith, it was done on the cheap. What he didn't do, and what I had no problem with, because I got something that I could afford because I had 3 guns done at once, and he didn't devote the time that one would normally have done to polishing the bores subsequent to the machine work on them. So had I thought about it, I should have realised that those marks, which we sort of ultimately put down to a tooling of some description, can only have come from that. And the caveat is this: most of my, in fact all of my side-by-sides are Spanish guns of no great value. There's the 3-inch Ugarte Cheer, which we've been testing not only with standard steel but with high performance steel cartridges. An AYA Yeoman, which I've been putting steel through for a very long time, and up until comparatively recently that the chokes were bored out through the original 1.5. And this AYA number 4, and all 3 of those were done at the same time, and they have those markings in the bore. At home, what I also have, but didn't bother to have that done, is it's not a Zabala, it's one of the cheap and cheerful Spanish Hermanos, which I learned means brothers.
It does.
And it'll come to me in a minute, but it's a cheap Spanish knockabout gun. From the serial numbers, it was built in 1964.
The height of quality from Spain.
The height of Spanish quality, actually, I mean, the quality of it is not too bad for a gun that I didn't pay anything for at all. But that also has had steel through it. It also has the original full and half choke. It's fired quite a few steel cartridges because but only within the parameters of standard steel. If you see what I mean,
Yeah.
I've not tried to push the chokes to the nth degree. But that gun in the bore is completely unmarked. So it's been using steel. It's not had the chokes done. It's had no machine marks in the barrels removed or otherwise, and it is still pristine inside.
Yeah. I think, as we surmised last time, there's no way that it could have been steel, the shape of the marks. I'm not sure how we missed it on the previous time.
No.
But who knows?
No. It's another example of one of those of those sort of sets of circumstances of just not looking for something and
well, we were just looking for damage up this end. I think that was probably our thing, and concentrating, not seeing the woods for the trees, which is our fault entirely. But
yes, there you go. I think, but again, one of the things to take away from that is that a bit of a speed wobble there, but I think we're still on course to say that steel shot will not destroy your gun.
No, it won't. So here's an interesting one. BioAmmo have just released something called BioBlue. They're the first people to release a commercially available, at least, non-lead, non-steel alternative, and a alloyed mixture of stuff. You have had some experience of these, certainly the individual components, in the past. What are your experiences of things other than, steel, bismuth, lead, tungsten? The mixtures.
Yes, going back to I think it started in the late 80s and went through the 90s. BASC did a series of field trials, range trials, with a whole variety of different non-toxic materials. One or two of which were zinc and tin. I have to say that they didn't come out of the trials especially well, but I used quite a number of and I can't remember if it was specifically zinc or tin. I don't think there's much difference in the specific gravity, the weight of the individual of that metal at the atomic level. But the cartridges had been produced in extremely large shot sizes. They were at least 1s or 3s, or might even have been BBs. And on a couple of occasions, I took them pigeon shooting. And out to about 30 yards, they actually worked reasonably well. The interesting thing was that the penetration, which is something that we've always regarded as being absolutely necessary to incapacitate or kill a bird, was almost non-existent. But what you did get, when you picked the bird up, was, I won't say it was jellified, but it was obvious that it had been hit by 1 or 2 very large pellets, and the transfer of shock
was exceptional
through the liquid part of the body, which includes the meat, had been exceptional. Instead of penetrating, it was as if it had been hit with a cricket bat, which had just it had crushed bone, damaged the flesh. You could almost see the bird. I'm trying to think of it's a bit like when you watch the slow motion film of a bullet hitting ballistic gelatin.
It first compresses.
Exactly, and then you get all this sort of wobbling of the gelatinous material, and that's what seemed to happen with these. And you pick the bird up, and it was virtually unmarked. The penetration was absolutely appalling, but the bird was dead. There were all sorts.
Is there any takeaway from that?
Well, I don't know, because it was not, to the best of my knowledge, pursued much beyond a certain point, because obviously, again, the concept was penetration equals death rather than massive trauma.
Which is interesting, because that's a complaint from a lot of people who use steel, and certainly my experience of it is you get very good penetration, but not great energy transfer.
No, and again, the question then becomes: is the energy transfer as important a component of causing death as you might perhaps think that it is. Lacerating all the serious internal organs with a pellet that might indeed go right through the body is just as fatal if you go to the other extreme of the ballistic scale of, for instance, a human being hit by a car.
There's no penetration.
There's no penetration.
They are dead, very likely dead.
But you wouldn't want to do that too often. So for me, I look upon some of these materials with interest, and we shouldn't perhaps dismiss them because they are conceivably operating within completely different parameters.
The end result is the same. As
long as the end result's the same, does it matter? The only thing I will say that was negative about these tin or zinc cartridges, at the time I was shooting an old Moroku 600, which still had lots of life left in it, except that the cartridges, the recoil was so severe that it shot it off the face. It completely knackered it.
Wow.
And they went off with a horrendous boom because they were obviously trying to get a very light and soft material
so
to
they're
move.
having to whack it at 1700 per second so that it still has a bit of space left at the end.
But because of when this took place, it was right back in the early days when
things have come on a long way.
When the ammunition manufacturers only had lead-based powders to play with. Now, with all the steel powders, which got a very long pressure curve, they develop relatively high pressure, but over a long period of time. So the net result is that you're not going to blow your gun up. You will get the speed, but also with significantly reduced recoil. So it's interesting to see where what we've just talked about in terms of shot material, allied to a modern high performance steel powder, where that might take us.
Well, in your own words, steel was not that great 30 years ago.
30 years ago it was utter rubbish, and I mean, I cannot disparage it enough. It was total carp, and it has come on significantly in the meantime. And again, there's no reason to believe why some of these other slightly exotic seeming shot materials might not turn out the same.
Beautiful. Interesting
times.
Yeah, I am aware that there are a couple of other manufacturers going down this route. Certainly it's amazing to see which ways certain people have gone in, whether that is to make better steel, to create different cups and different wad systems.
Yes, or not at all.
Or, as the case may be, to do absolutely nothing. Or to say, well, let's look at another option.
Yeah. Yes, interesting times. And again, I think this is why a lot of the stuff that you specifically do is important. I'm sure it will be the case that some of these materials simply won't work. But we're now in a position in terms of getting information and concepts out to the shooting public for people to have a broader number of reference points that they can base their opinions on. We are now a couple of years down the line, and although you still see it occasionally on the internet, particularly my favourite, Facebook, oh yes, you can't shoot steel through any greater than a half choke.
It's like a bat signal to you when that comment comes up. I quite enjoy counting the seconds before Nick Horten comments.
It's not that I disagree with some of the concept, because from a patterning point of view you might well be better off with half choke. There's a whole number of reasons why you should have that debate, but we are gradually getting past the point where that notion became quite erroneously lodged in people's heads, and we're getting past that. We're moving into different areas with different types of non-toxic shot.
People are willing to try, which is the biggest thing.
Exactly. Yes. So that's a win-win all round.
Have you any more you'd like to add today, Nick?
To
our conversation.
Thank you for doing this.
Well, my pleasure.
For me, it started to eject two cartridges, a fired cartridge and the unfired cartridge, but with some skillful filing work. I hope that
hopefully it'll work.
Fingers crossed.
Unfortunately, not entirely brilliantly made in the first place.
No.
But it doesn't matter.
No, like any Spanish gun, if you look at them long enough, you'll find parts of it that you think, I think he went for a tea break there, didn't he?
But you're not paying several £1,000s for the privilege, so does it matter?
No.
Probably not.
I think not. So it's fingers crossed. Looking forward to the next shooting season. I know that one of the things that we've talked about previously, but it's been constantly put on the back burner because of COVID lockdown. We really must get some punt guns together and go and play with those.
That would be a good way of celebrating the end of any lockdown. Let's do that.
I think it would.
Much banging.
Yes, I think we could probably find 7 or 8 to play with, including an interesting double-barreled gun.
I very much look forward to it, Nick.
So do I.